Hello students and welcome to the lecture. So students, as you can see here that basically in this lecture, we are going to start our discussion over the international boundaries. Okay. This is going to be a topic for this particular lecture. Talking about this, the international boundaries are important from competitive exams point of view. All right. Like we could say, these are the part of both the static as well as the current. How is it? Like static, they are the part. Okay. Because they are the static portion. How do they become the part of the current? Like if anything happens there. For example, we know the Israel and Palestine are at war. Okay. So there you can say border could be in the news. That could be asked. Similar happening with Russia and Ukraine. The Russia and Ukraine are at war. Okay. So we could say the question could be asked you about their border nearby cities. All right. Any specific border post and all. So that's why it's become important from the current affairs point of view as well as the static point of view. And we are required to learn about them in a proper manner so that whenever we have to face our examination and we could get the question from here, we must mark the right answer. Okay. So as you can see that basically we are going to talk about the international boundaries in this lecture. All right. And also we will see the summary. Okay. So this is going to be a course of action. First, we will discuss the international boundaries. Second, we will discuss the summary of all of them. But before all of these things, we have a small disclaimer presented over here, which we are required to understand first. And the disclaimer is like, the images used in a slide deck are for educational purposes only. We respect the intellectual property rights of the original creators and owners of these images. If you are the owner of any of the images used in this deck and have any concerns or issues, then please contact us at sathee@iitk.ac.in and we shall remove the images. After understanding this, now let's begin with the first. The first is the Radcliffe line. Talking about this, the Radcliffe line is actually the boundary demarcation line between India and Pakistan that published on 17th August 1947 upon the partition of India, and what names after its architect Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who as chairman of the Boundary Commission. So what happened, like we know, during the independence time, basically the country of India got divided between the two separate nations. One is Pakistan, second one is India. And we could say actually the three portions: Pakistan, India, and East Pakistan. Okay. This portion of East Pakistan later on converted into the Bangladesh in the 1971 Indo-Pak War. Prior to this, it was East Pakistan. Even prior to this, it was Indian territory. Got it? So that was the Radcliffe line. All right. Then we have the 49th parallel north, or you can call it as a 49th parallel only. It is actually a border between the Canadian provinces in the north, like British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. These all are the northern Canadian provinces. Okay. In south, it is the boundary of US states of Washington, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota. So you can say 49th parallel in north, it's having the Canadian boundary comprising the provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. In south, it's having the provinces of United States of America. The provinces are Washington, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota. All right. After this, we have the McMahon line. The McMahon line is actually the borderline between the Tibet region of China and northeast region of India. Tibetan region of China and northeast region of India. Proposed by the British colonial administrator Henry McMahon at 1914 Shimla Convention, which was signed between the British and the Tibetan representatives. And now it is the currently effective boundary between India and China. So what happened? Like we could say, actually, the boundary line between Indo and China was not defined, or we could say India and Tibet was not defined. Okay, because of this, many territories of Tibet and many territories of India got intermixed, and that became the bone of contention between the two countries, the British India as well as the Tibet. Okay, to resolve this dispute, there was a convention at Shimla in 1940. In this convention, British colonial administrator Henry McMahon, he was the one who proposed a line between the Tibet and India. And that line was named after his line, McMahon line. Okay. So this McMahon line was actually the boundary line defined between the India and China. India and Tibet, sorry, not China on that time. Okay. Later on in 1948, when China acquired the Tibet region, then it became the line between India and China. We could say, priorly that was the boundary of China and this region was Tibet, and we had the line with it, like this line you could call it. Okay. But when China captured Tibet and penetrated deeper, now this is the McMahon line, and it's become a line between, boundary line between the India and China. Got it? Then we have Maginot line. The Maginot line is actually named after the French Minister of War, André Maginot. And that line was actually a line of concrete fortification, obstacle, and weapon installations built by France in 1930s to deter invasion by Germany. So the decade of 1930 to 1940. We know in that decade, basically the Second World War was started in 1939. When the Second World War started, German forces were trying to invade the French territories. To deter them, to stop them, the French made a line of concrete fortification, various obstacles, and installed the weapons at those lines in 1930s, so that they could, you can say, defend the territory from the Germans and they could deter their invasion. And that line was Maginot Line, named after the French Minister of War, André Maginot. Remember this. Now, let's move forward. The Durand Line. The Durand Line is actually a frontier boundary, lies between the Afghanistan and Pakistan. Remember, prior to this, it was between Afghanistan and India. How? Let me tell you. But before this, just learn about this. It was established after an 1893 Memorandum of Understanding, in short known as MOU, signed between Mortimer Durand of British India and Afghan Amir Abdul Rahman Khan. So we could say, prior to the independence and even before it, during the ancient times, basically the Afghanistan was ruled by the Indian rulers. Even in the medieval times, the Mughals had established their control over the Afghan territories till their Emperor Akbar. After Akbar, the Jahangir was not that much successful to control the Kabul, and Kabul left to the Afghans. And after this, the Afghans also captured the entire Afghanistan. Okay. But because there was no clearly defined boundary between British India and Afghanistan, that's why many parts of British India were falling into the Afghan territory. Many parts of Afghan territory were falling into the British Indian territory. And that became the contention between the two nations. To resolve this, that was the year of 1893 when Mortimer Durrant, who was a representative of British India, and Afghan Amir, who was the ruler of Afghanistan, Abdul Rahman Khan. They both came together and they signed a memorandum of understanding and they created a frontier boundary between Afghanistan and British India. But as we know, after the independence, that boundary actually falls into the side of Pakistan because that western part of India is now known as the Pakistan. So now this line is between the Afghanistan and Pakistan, but in reality it was signed between British India and Afghanistan. Got it? Now we have the 38th parallel. The 38th parallel north actually formed the border between the North and South Korea prior to the Korean War. Alright, like we know there are the two nations in world that we have. Korean nations we would like to say. First is North Korea, another one is South Korea. The Mannerheim Line, defensive fortification line on the Karelian Isthmus, built by the Finland against the Soviet Union. During the Winter War, it became known as the Mannerheim Line after the field marshal Baron Karl Gustav Emil Mannerheim. The line was constructed in two phases. The first phase was between 1920 to 1924 and second phase was between 1932 to 1939. Okay. Then we have the Hindenburg Line. That was the boundary line between the Germany and Poland, to which the Germans retreated in 1917 during the First World War. So we know in world history we had two world wars. The first between 1940 to 1980. The second was between 1939 to 1945. The First World War was for 4 years, 1914 to 1918. The Second World War was for 6 years, 1939 to 1945. So in the First World War, the Germans attacked Poland or the Polish. But somehow the Germans did not succeed and they had to retreat from Hindenburg Line, that was the boundary line between Germany and Poland, in 1971 during the First World War. Okay. After this we have Siegfried Line. It is a line of fortification drawn up by the Germany on its border with France. 17th parallel, defined as the boundary between the North Vietnam and South Vietnam before the two were united. So at the time, basically we had the two different nations, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Okay, and the boundary line between them was 17th parallel. But with time, the North Vietnam and South Vietnam got merged up, and now we have one nation only, known as the Vietnam. Got it? Then we have the 24th parallel, which Pakistan claims for demarcation line between India and Pakistan. This, however, is not recognized by India. So basically, the actual line between India and Pakistan is the Radcliffe Line. But somehow, the Pakistan claims that apart from Radcliffe Line, the 24th parallel is the exact line between the India and Pakistan. This 24th parallel comprising some part of the modern day India. So that's why the Pakistan claims it, but India did not recognize it. Here we have finished the topic. Now it's a part for summary. So basically, the Indian territory touches with Pakistan on international basis, China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and other maritime borders also. So here we have finished our topic. It is requested to all of you, kindly revise the facts and figures that we have discussed in this lecture and keep yourself ready for the next lecture. With this note, let's end this lecture and